If you've ever dreamed of stepping back in time, of walking the muddy streets of a medieval village, or watching the sunrise over a castle tower while the bells echo softly across the valley, then tonight, let your mind wander there with me. You don't need to move or even think too much. Just breathe slowly, let your body grow heavy, and allow your imagination to drift. We'll travel together through the distant centuries, exploring what life truly felt like, long before modern comfort or light. And if you enjoy these quiet journeys into the past, you can always return here to this calm corner of history, where every story unfolds like a lullaby for the curious mind. Now, close your eyes if you'd like. Let's begin our quiet walk into medieval times. The air is cool and heavy with mist. A faint scent of wood smoke lingers somewhere nearby. You're standing on a narrow dirt path, the earth soft and uneven beneath your boots. It's morning, but the kind of morning that feels half asleep itself, wrapped in fog and silence. The only sound is the creak of a cartwheel somewhere ahead, and the quiet bleating of a goat. You walk slowly toward the sound. Around you, the small wooden houses seem to lean inward, their thatched roofs dark and damp from the night. A woman in a rough linen dress sweeps the mud from her doorway, humming softly under her breath. She looks tired, but calm, like someone who has done this same small task every dawn for as long as she can remember. In the distance, a castle stands faintly visible through the fog. It's not grand or glittering, but heavy and old, its stones darkened by centuries of rain. Smoke curls from the chimneys, carrying the smell of burning peat and boiling broth. It's the scent of another age of survival, simplicity, and endurance. You pass a group of villagers near a small well. One of them draws water in a wooden bucket, the rope squeaking softly against the wheel. Another kneels beside him, rinsing a bundle of herbs, pennyroyal sage, maybe thyme gathered for the day's meals, or perhaps to treat some small ailment. Everyone moves with the same quiet rhythm. There's no rush, there's no clock here. Time is measured by the sun, by chores, by the turning of seasons. You notice how they greet one another. A nod, a quiet word, a small gesture of respect. There's a sense of shared routine, of community that runs deep beneath the surface. Yet beneath that peace, a truth lingers that might surprise you. Life here was fragile. And if you, someone from the modern world, were suddenly dropped into this age of mud and silence, you might not last even a single day. The air grows colder as you step away from the village center. The fields stretch endlessly ahead, uneven and damp, dotted with wooden plows and stacks of straw. A boy leads the oxen along a furrow, guiding them patiently with a stick. His hands are small, calloused already. He can't be more than 10 years old. Children grow fast here, not through books or games, but through work. Before sunrise, they're already busy, fetching water, tending fires, feeding chickens, collecting wood. There are no weekends, no holidays beyond those marked by the church bells. You pause to watch him. There's a strange beauty in the steadiness of his movement, the way he keeps his rhythm, even when the mud pulls at his feet. The life is hard, but it flows like the seasons, constant, predictable, and quiet. If you tried to live this way, your body would ache before noon. Your stomach would growl. Meals were simple and small, coarse bread, onions, perhaps a bit of cheese, maybe thin broth if you were lucky. Water wasn't always safe to drink, so ale, weak and sour, was the everyday drink, even for children. Still, they survived, not through comfort or wealth, but through endurance. That calm, steady kind of strength that doesn't ask why. The kind that wakes up, works, prays, and does it all again tomorrow. In the distance, a church bell rings, slow, deep, and soft. The sound drifts through the mist like a voice calling everyone home. You follow it. In the center of every village stands the church, its stone walls plain and grey, its small wooden door worn smooth by countless hands. Inside, the light filters through stained glass, painting the cold stone floor in shades of red and gold. The air smells of wax and smoke, faintly metallic from the iron candle holders. Someone kneels near the altar, whispering a prayer you can't quite hear. Faith is not just religion here. It's rhythm, comfort, and explanation. When crops fail, it's said to be God's will. When a child falls ill, it's His mystery. When life feels too heavy, it's His promise of rest that keeps people going. You sit for a while, listening to the faint echo of footsteps in the nave. The quiet feels ancient, not empty, but full, as if the walls themselves remember every whispered hope. A single candle flickers on the altar, its light trembling against the shadows. Outside again, The fog begins to lift. The sun rises weakly, a pale coin behind the clouds. You can see faces more clearly now, men and women in coarse wool tunics, hoods pulled low, hands busy with baskets and tools. They speak in soft, rough accents, their words carrying centuries of survival. A merchant stands beside a small cart filled with pottery and salt. His beard is thick with dust, his eyes alert. He tells stories from other villages, of roads washed away by rain, of markets far to the south, of lords who fight wars none of these peasants will ever see. His tales are currency here. They're how people know the wider world exists. A woman kneads dough nearby, her hands strong and practiced. Another laughs softly at one of his stories, shaking her head as she works. Laughter is rare here, quiet, fleeting, but when it comes it feels like sunlight breaking through clouds. You walk further, feeling the mud give way to firmer ground. The fields stretch around you in golds and browns. A lone crow calls in the distance, its voice echoing through the still air, and for a moment you feel the strange peace that must have lived here, a peace built on acceptance, on the soft rhythm of survival. They lived with hunger, with cold, with uncertainty, but they also lived with connection to each other, to the land, to time itself. Everything had meaning, every gesture carried weight, and in that slow, patient world, they found something we often lose, a sense of belonging to the very earth they walked on. You stop for a moment, breathing in the faint smell of smoke, hearing the low hum of distant voices. Somewhere, a mother calls her child home. Somewhere, an old man stirs the embers of his fire. Somewhere, a shepherd hums to his flock as the evening fog begins to roll back in. And as the light fades again, you realize they endured not because life was kind, but because they had learned to live with its rhythm, to bend but not break. Let's keep walking now, slowly, quietly, deeper into this world of faith and soil, of hard hands and steady hearts, into the story of how medieval people survived, loved, and dreamed in a time that feels so far away, yet somehow still lives beneath our own. The morning mist fades into a pale, trembling light that settles softly over the fields. The rhythm of the village hums to life again, not in sudden noise, but in slow, familiar movement. The distant bleat of sheep, the scrape of wood against stone, the faint clatter of metal as a farmer sharpens his plow. You walk quietly among them, blending into their world, unnoticed yet somehow belonging. The scent of the earth is thick, damp soil, crushed grass, the faint trace of smoke. It's the scent of work, of endurance, of lives rooted deeply into the ground they till. Every step you take seems to pull you further into their time, as if each breath draws away another layer of centuries. You can almost feel it, the heartbeat of a world that has forgotten haste. A woman stoops near the edge of a small garden patch. Her hands move quickly, pulling weeds from the damp earth, her face half-shadowed beneath a linen coif. Beside her, a small child watches with wide eyes, holding a basket half filled with wilted greens. You pause for a moment, watching the child carefully gather what little the season has offered. Nothing is wasted here. Every leaf, every crumb, every flicker of light is precious. It's spring, though the air still carries the chill of winter's memory. The villagers look upward now and then, as if searching the clouds for signs of fair weather. They know the sky well, its moods, its promises, its threats. Too much rain means rot, too little means famine. Their lives hang in that balance, quiet and fragile. Further along, a group of men work together near a wooden cart. Their backs are bent, their shirts dark with sweat. The soil they dig looks heavy and dark, thick with roots. You hear their soft laughter between grunts of effort, small jokes exchanged without malice, the kind that make hard labor feel less lonely. They don't complain. Complaining doesn't change the soil or the seasons. It wastes breath that could be used for work, and yet, in those moments of laughter, you can feel something profound, a shared understanding that this is their world, imperfect and harsh, but wholly theirs. You stop to watch a shepherd lead his flock down the slope. The sheep move like clouds across the green, bells tinkling faintly. His dog darts between them, nipping at stragglers, and he whistles low, almost a melody. The shepherd's cloak flutters in the wind, its edges frayed. He looks weathered, but peaceful. A man who's learned that silence can be a kind of companion. He doesn't see his life as hardship. Not exactly. To him, the hills and sky are old friends. The sheep his steady company. He knows every sound of the land, every bird's call, every change in the air. You realize that even in their poverty, People here are rich in something modern life often loses. The intimacy of existence. A sound rises from the distance, a slow, rhythmic hammering. You follow it, down a narrow path lined with mossy stones, until you reach the blacksmith's forge. The door stands open, the heat spilling out into the cool air. Inside, the smith lifts his hammer again, striking iron that glows like captured fire. The clang echoes deep and bright, each blow sending sparks into the dimness. He works slowly, deliberately. Each movement is a blend of strength and patience. The forge hisses, the bellows sigh, the rhythm never breaks. His face glistens with sweat, but there's no rush in him, only focus, as if time itself bends to his pace. A boy stands beside him, eyes wide, holding a small piece of metal with tongs. His hands tremble slightly. The smith murmured something quiet, and the boy nods. He's learning not just a trade, but a way of life, one built on precision, on repetition, on faith that effort itself is meaning. Outside the forge, you hear the faint sounds of the market beginning to stir. There's no grand bustle, just the gentle murmur of barter, the creak of wooden carts, the soft calls of vendors selling onions, bread, a handful of eggs, perhaps a small jug of ale. A few chickens cluck from a basket. Somewhere, a child giggles as a dog sniffs at their feet. You walk slowly among them. The air smells of bread, smoke, and wool. A woman sits behind a table of woven cloth, the colors faded but beautiful in their simplicity, soft browns, pale blues, muted greens. She hums an old tune under her breath, her hands moving over the fabric with care. It took her days, perhaps weeks, to weave what she now hopes to trade for flour or oil. You stop near a stall where an old man sells candles. His fingers are stained with wax. Each candle is imperfect, slightly uneven, but the light they promise feels precious. He looks up at you with a smile that carries both weariness and kindness. A good flame, he might say, if he spoke your language, is worth more than gold on a dark night. And he's right. When the sun sets here, darkness is complete. The world shrinks to the circle of light from a single candle, or the low fire in a hearth. You begin to understand how deeply people in this time valued small things, a spark, a loaf, a song. As the day stretches on, the rhythm slows again. You follow the path out of the village toward the open fields, where a group of women work together harvesting herbs and wild greens. Their laughter drifts softly through the air. One of them sings an old folk song, the melody rising and falling like the wind through tall grass. It's in a language you don't recognize, but its feeling is clear. It speaks of endurance, of turning the soil, of trusting that life will come again after every harsh winter. A few paces away, an older woman kneels beside a small wooden cross, half hidden by grass. She whispers a prayer, tracing her fingers across the rough wood. Loss is woven quietly into every life here, accepted, not fought. They mourn, but they keep moving, because the land never stops. It demands their return each dawn. You pause, letting the soft sounds of wind and voices fade into the distance. You can almost feel how this world breathes, how everything depends on everything else. The cows, the crops, the weather, the people, all moving in one great, slow rhythm. It's a fragile balance, but it works, held together by faith, by habit, by hope. By hope. As evening begins to fall, smoke rises once more from the chimneys. The sky turns to shades of grey and violet. You hear the distant toll of the church bell again, not for prayer this time, but for rest. Families begin to gather in their homes, drawing their cloaks tighter against the cool air. You wander toward one small cottage, the door open just enough to see inside. The room glows with firelight. A pot simmers over the hearth. Its steam smells faintly of onions and herbs. A man sits on a wooden stool, mending a net by the firelight. His wife hums softly while spinning wool. A child sleeps beside the dog near the hearth, curled in a blanket. It's a simple scene, but it holds a quiet grace. The walls are bare, the floor rough, yet the air feels safe. This, perhaps, was what survival meant, not comfort, but togetherness. The man looks up from his work, staring into the flames. His face is lined but peaceful, his eyes reflecting the small light that fills the room. He doesn't dream of riches or adventure. He dreams of another morning, another harvest, another meal. And somehow, that's enough. Outside, the wind picks up again. The fields whisper softly under the moonlight, silver and still. You stand there for a while, listening. The night in this world feels deep, not silent, but full of life you can barely hear. Crickets, the low rustle of leaves, the distant bark of a dog, all of it forms a lullaby the villagers have heard every night of their lives. You begin to walk again, past the sleeping village, past the quiet church, past the dim glow of scattered fires. The stars appear slowly overhead, clear and countless. You tilt your head up, realizing how bright they once were. Before cities, before lights, before noise, for them, the stars were maps, guides, and stories. The heavens told of time, of harvests, of fate. Some believed the stars carried messages, or souls, or warnings, but mostly, they were comfort proof that something greater than hunger or hardship watched over them. And as you look upward, you understand why. In the endless dark, a sky full of stars must have felt like hope. You breathe deeply, the cool night air filling your lungs. The village behind you sleeps, the fields lie still, and for a moment, you too feel part of this ancient rhythm of work and rest, light and shadow, life and time. Tomorrow, they'll wake again before dawn, to live, to endure, to begin again, just as they always have. The dawn returns quietly, brushing its pale light across the wooden beams of cottages and the damp earth of the village road. A rooster crows, slow and uncertain at first, then again with more confidence. Smoke begins to rise once more from the thatched roofs, curling lazily into the soft morning mist. The rhythm continues, a life both fragile and enduring, drawn out like a breath that never ends. In this world, every morning is earned. The villagers rise not because they want to, but because the land demands it. There are animals to feed, fires to stoke, water to fetch. The well at the center of the village becomes a place of quiet gathering. Women with wooden pails chat softly, their laughter breaking through the stillness like birdsong. It's laughter that holds a kind of courage, the kind that grows in people who have known both hunger and hope. They talk of weather, of neighbors, of small things. There are no grand ambitions here, no distant dreams of wealth or fame. Their world is bound by the fields, the seasons, and the church bell. Yet within those boundaries, they've built something enduring, a kind of faith that life, even when hard, is worth living. A group of men stand near the blacksmith's shop, trading quiet jokes as they mend their tools. Their humor is simple and sharp, built on shared experience. They tease each other gently about crooked fences, stubborn animals, or the way old John tripped over a chicken last week. It's laughter shaped by survival. Laughter that keeps the cold from sinking too deep into their bones. You realize something subtle. Even in a time when every day could bring hardship, people found reasons to smile. Humor wasn't a luxury, it was a form of strength. It softened the rough edges of life, reminding them that even pain could be faced with a grin. Children chase each other near the edge of the fields, their bare feet splashing through puddles left by the morning rain. Their games are made from imagination and scraps. A stick becomes a sword, a pile of hay a castle. They laugh freely, unaware of the weight their parents carry. Childhood, even here, is still a kind of magic, brief, fragile, and pure. Not far away, the church bell tolls again. It's a sound that anchors the day, calling people to prayer, to gratitude, to routine. The church itself stands small but proud, its stones weathered, its wooden door creaking softly in the wind. Inside, the light filters through stained glass, scattering gentle color across the floor. The air smells of wax and incense. Here, faith is not a choice, it's a necessity. The villagers believe deeply, not out of fear alone, but out of need. When the harvest fails, when sickness spreads, when a child is lost, prayer becomes the only thing left to hold. Their God is both distant and near, a comfort, a warning, a presence they never question. The priest, a thin man with kind eyes, speaks softly from the altar. His Latin words drift through the small church, half understood but wholly felt. The people bow their heads, murmuring their own prayers beneath their breath, some for forgiveness, some for rain, some simply for strength. The sound blends into something almost musical, like a hum that fills the air with quiet surrender. After the service, they linger outside. The children chase each other around the churchyard. The adults speak softly of the coming planting season, of repairs that must be made before the next storm. The priest blesses them one by one, his voice tired but sincere. He knows every soul in this village, their secrets, their sorrows, their hopes. In the corner of the churchyard, near the low stone wall, lies the small graveyard. The crosses there are simple, carved by hand, their inscriptions fading with time. Death here is not a stranger, it's a neighbor, one who visits often but never cruelly. The people don't fear it as much as they accept it, knowing that life is a fragile gift, easily taken and easily given back to the earth. A woman kneels by one of the graves, whispering a prayer. Her fingers trace the carved letters, and for a moment her eyes glisten. Then she stands, brushes the dirt from her skirt, and walks back toward the fields. Grief has no luxury to linger. There's always work waiting. The fields stretch out beyond the village, wide and quiet under the morning sun. You see men and women moving in rhythm, bent over rows of soil, their tools glinting softly in the light. The air is full of the sound of effort, the steady scrape of hoes, the rustle of wind through the crops, the low murmur of voices sharing both labor and silence. Their hands are rough, their backs bent, but their movements hold a kind of grace, the grace of repetition, of knowing each task by heart. They don't question the work, they don't resent it. To them, toil is simply life. It's the way things have always been, and perhaps always will be. As the sun rises higher, the sound of a flute drifts through the fields. A boy, too young to work yet, plays softly from a nearby hill. The tune is simple and haunting, a melody that feels as old as the soil itself. The workers glance up, smile faintly, and keep moving. The music doesn't stop them, it joins them, becoming part of the rhythm of the day. In the afternoon, the village grows quieter again. The sun warms the rooftops. The smell of baked bread drifts from an open window. A dog sleeps in the shade, its ears twitching at the flies. Somewhere, a spinning wheel hums softly, turning wool into thread. It's a world without hurry, without noise, slow, steady, and entirely alive. Later, as the sky deepens toward gold, the people gather again, this time near the edge of the village, where a traveling peddler has set up his cart. He brings small wonders from distant towns, colored ribbons, polished spoons, bits of glass that catch the light. The children watch in awe. The adults inspect each item carefully, bartering with quiet dignity. The peddler tells stories, two tales of great cities, of kings and knights, of wars fought far away. The villagers listen, half believing, half dreaming. For a moment, their world feels larger. Then, as the peddler moves on, the silence returns, and life resumes its steady pulse. That night, they gather again by the fire. The warmth glows against their tired faces. Someone begins to tell a story, not of kings or wars, but of their own village, a spirit said to wander the nearby woods, of strange lights that sometimes appear over the marshes. The children lean close, wide-eyed, half afraid and half delighted. Stories here are more than entertainment. They are memory, tradition, comfort. They carry lessons and warnings, hope and humor. In a world without books or screens, stories are how time is kept, how one life leaves a trace upon another dot. As the storyteller's voice softens, the fire crackles lower. One by one, the villagers drift away, back to their homes, back to sleep. The night air is cool, the stars bright. The last embers glow faintly in the hearth, their light dancing across the walls before fading into darkness. The village rests again, wrapped in silence. Tomorrow will come the same way, slowly, patiently, with work and laughter and faith. And though centuries may pass, though the world may change beyond recognition, something in their way of life will always remain: a quiet resilience, a trust in rhythm, a peace found in simplicity. Night in the medieval village arrives like a soft tide, slow, inevitable, and full of quiet mystery. The fields grow dark, the animals settle, and small lights appear one by one behind cottage windows. Inside, the air is thick with the smell of smoke and herbs, of wool and damp wood. The day's labor has ended, but life does not stop. It only shifts from the noise of the fields to the murmurs of home, by the flickering light of a single candle. A mother tends to her child's small cut. There are no physicians here, no polished instruments or sterile bandages, only a strip of clean cloth, a bit of honey, a whispered prayer. Healing is both simple and sacred. It is guided by instinct, by old knowledge passed from mother to daughter, from one generation to the next. In one corner of the room, bundles of dried herbs hang from a beam: lavender for calm, sage for cleansing, yarrow for wounds. These are the medicines of the people gathered under moonlight, dried carefully by the fire, stored in wooden boxes or clay jars. To outsiders, it might look primitive, but to those who live by the land, it is wisdom, the kind that grows from centuries of watching, listening, and trusting nature. In the next cottage over, an old woman sits alone by her hearth, muttering softly as she grinds herbs into a small bowl. She's known in the village as a healer or, to some, a witch. Her hands move with practiced rhythm, mixing roots and powders. Sometimes she treats fever, sometimes heartbreak. Her remedies are half science, half faith. People come to her in secret. They leave gifts of bread, milk, or candles in exchange for cures, charms, or blessings. And while some whisper of superstition, most believe that she holds knowledge that even priests cannot touch. Superstition, after all, is not just fear. It is an attempt to understand what cannot be seen. The peasants live in a world where much is uncertain: illness, weather, life itself. So they fill the gaps with stories and symbols. A horseshoe above the door for luck. A sprig of rosemary at the window to ward off spirits. A prayer murmured when thunder rolls across the fields. The villagers' faith is layered, half Christian, half ancient. The church teaches one truth, but the land whispers another. They believe in saints and angels, yes, but also in fairies, in forest spirits, in omens that flutter through dreams. For them, the world is alive with unseen forces, some kind, some cruel, all deserving of respect. On quiet nights, people tell stories about the woods beyond the village. They say strange lights appear there, blue and flickering, like lanterns carried by invisible hands. They call them willow. Some say they lead travelers to treasure. Others warn they lead only to bogs and death. Still, children sneak to the edge of the forest, just to see for themselves, their hearts pounding with a thrill that feels almost holy. Life here is full of contrasts, hardship and beauty, faith and fear, pain and tenderness. Yet through it all runs a deep thread of connection between people, between earth and sky, between the living and the dead. At a nearby cottage, a young couple sits quietly beside their hearth. Their marriage was arranged, as most were, but time has turned familiarity into affection. The man's hands are calloused from years in the fields. The woman's are rough from spinning and tending the fire. They speak little. Their comfort is not in words, but in presence. She rests her head on his shoulder. He closes his eyes. Outside, the wind hums gently through the trees, and for a moment, the world feels entirely still. Love, in this age, is not often spoken aloud. It hides in gestures: a mended cloak, a shared crust of bread, a hand on a weary shoulder. There are no declarations, no grand promises, only quiet acts that build, day by day, into something unshakable. In the center of the village, an older woman teaches a young bride to weave. Their hands move together, pulling threads over and under, creating patterns that have existed for generations. As they work, they talk softly about life, about patience, about how love endures through seasons and silence. The rhythm of their weaving becomes a kind of lullaby. Elsewhere, in the shadow of the church, a priest kneels in prayer. His Latin chants drift through the cold air, mingling with the chirping of night insects. He prays for his people, for their health, their faith, their souls. He knows they still keep their old beliefs, their charms and stories, but he does not scold them. He understands that faith, in any form, is what keeps them alive. As the stars brighten overhead, the village sleeps. The healer's herbs hang motionless in the still air. The fields lie silent under a blanket of mist. The dogs no longer bark, and even the owls have grown quiet. The whole world seems to breathe in one slow rhythm, peaceful, endless, ancient. And yet, somewhere out there in the dark, danger still exists. Wolves roam the forests, bandits haunt the old roads, plagues travel unseen, carried by wind and rat alike. But for now, none of that matters. Tonight, the villagers rest in the fragile safety of their small world, a world held together by love, superstition, faith, and the quiet, unbreakable bond of survival. Tomorrow will come, as it always does, bringing new work, new challenges, new hopes, and still they will endure, not because life is kind, but because endurance itself has become their form of grace. The seasons turn in the medieval countryside with a rhythm that feels almost like breathing, slow, constant, inevitable. The peasants do not measure time in minutes or hours, but in sunlight, frost, and the ripening of grain. Life follows the land's quiet pulse, and each change in the air brings both hardship and beauty. Winter loosens its grip with the faintest whisper, the sound of melting snow dripping from thatched roofs, the first green shoots pushing through frozen earth. After months of cold and darkness, the villagers emerge from their cottages with cautious hope. They stretch, they breathe, They look at the sky as though it was something entirely new. The soil is heavy, wet, and waiting. Soon, it must be plowed. Men lead oxen through the fields, their boots sinking into mud. The air smells of thawing earth, damp, raw, alive. This is the season of beginnings, of small miracles that grow unnoticed. Women scatter seeds by hand, their motions slow and sure. Each handful carries both faith and memory, a reminder that survival is never guaranteed, yet always attempted. As spring unfolds, the village awakens in color and sound. The hedges bloom with wildflowers, bees hum in the meadows. Children chase each other barefoot through grass that still glistens with dew. For a little while, laughter replaces hunger, and the world feels generous. Evenings are mild again. Families gather outside their homes, sharing bowls of broth, bread, and soft talk. The smell of firewood mingles with the sweet scent of blossoms. Some hum old songs, tunes without words, passed down through centuries of living close to the soil. Then, summer arrives, bright, long, and full of labor. The fields stretch golden beneath the sun, heavy with promise. The villagers rise before dawn, when the light is still cool and blue. Work begins with the rhythm of the scythe. Swish, pause, gather, bind. Over and over, a steady song of survival. Sweat glistens on foreheads. The air hums with the sound of insects and the soft creak of wooden carts. It is exhausting work, but there is joy in it too. To harvest is to see the reward of every hope, every prayer whispered into the soil. Children bring water in clay jugs. Women tie bundles of grain, their skirts brushing the earth. The old sit in the shade, shelling peas or mending clothes, watching the young with quiet pride. For a few precious weeks, there is enough to eat, enough to store. Hunger takes a step back, and the village breathes easier. When the harvest is gathered, celebration follows. The peasants may live simple lives, but they understand joy, not the loud, fleeting kind, but the deep, grateful kind that comes from knowing what has been endured. The feast is small but full of meaning. Tables are laid outside, rough wood covered with linen. There are roasted turnips, stewed lentils, and bread baked golden and warm. Ale flows freely, laughter ripples through the air. Even the lord of the manor, seated apart in his finery, cannot help but smile at the sight of his tenants dancing. They dance until the stars emerge, slow, looping circles that echo the turning of the seasons themselves. The fire crackles, sparks rising like tiny constellations into the night. Someone plays a simple tune on a pipe, and others join in, singing softly. Children fall asleep in the grass. Couples lean close. For a little while, all the worries of the year, the taxes, the sickness, the endless labor fade into the background hum of music and warmth. Then comes autumn, the season of reflection. The fields stand empty again, trimmed and quiet. The air turns crisp. Smoke from hearths drifts lazily upward, carrying the scent of apples and burning oak. This is the time for preparing, for counting stores, for weaving new cloaks before the cold returns. Autumn is beautiful in its melancholy. The trees turn gold and crimson, and for a brief moment, even the poorest peasant feels rich beneath their color. Children collect fallen leaves, laughing as they toss them into the air. Old men mend fences. Women boil fruit into preserves, humming softly as they work. And then, once again, winter arrives. The fields lie barren beneath a layer of frost, the rivers slow to glass. The village retreats inward. But now, they are ready. Wood has been chopped, grain stored, wool spun thick for warmth. Evenings grow long and silent. Outside, the wind moans against shutters. Inside, the fire glows steady, painting soft light across rough faces. People tell stories again of saints, of monsters, of love, of luck. The same tales they've told for generations, changing little, yet always feeling new in the cold dark. A young boy sits at his grandfather's feet, eyes wide, listening to stories of years long gone. He imagines himself as a knight, or a farmer, or perhaps a sailor who will one day see beyond the horizon. His mother watches him from the hearth, smiling faintly. She knows that most of his life will be spent right here in this village, under these skies, yet still she lets him dream. The old man pauses, staring into the fire. His voice softens. The land, he says, remembers. It's a saying often repeated, one the villagers believe deeply. The earth that feeds them also holds their stories of famine and feast, of sorrow and song. Every field, every stone, every path is sacred in its own quiet way. Outside, snow begins to fall again, soft, slow, almost tender. It blankets the roofs, the fields, the tracks left behind by carts and bare feet. The world turns white, and time itself seems to pause inside the cottages. People drift into sleep, lulled by the crackle of fire and the sigh of wind. The rhythm of the year continues, endless, ancient, and profoundly human. Faith, in the life of a medieval peasant, was not just a matter of belief. It was the thread that held the fragile weave of their existence together. It lived in every sunrise, every whispered prayer before work, every hope murmured over bread before a meal. Faith was not grand or distant. It was quiet and intimate, woven into the rhythm of their days like the steady beating of a heart at dawn. When the first pale light touched the church spire, a bell would sound across the fields. It was the call to prayer, but also the call to begin. The peasants would cross themselves before stepping into the chill air, their breath visible in the soft gold of morning. Whether they were devout or simply obedient to habit, it gave their days structure, a sense of belonging to something beyond toil and hunger. The small village church was more than a place of worship. It was a gathering point, a refuge, a keeper of all joy and grief. Its stone walls absorbed centuries of whispered hopes and sorrowful confessions. Inside, the air smelled of wax and incense, and the light came through colored glass in soft, trembling hues, blues, reds, and golds that painted the worn faces of those kneeling below. There were no sermons that promised wealth or ease. The priest spoke instead of endurance, humility, and the promise of rest beyond this world. For peasants who owned little and worked endlessly, the idea of heaven, of peace, of release, was enough to keep the heart steady. Every Sunday, the entire village would gather there. Mud-stained boots lined the door, cloaks hung dripping after the walk through fields. The sound of the Latin Mass rolled through the church, a language few understood, yet all felt. It was not the words that mattered, but the rhythm, the song like rise and fall that seemed to lift their thoughts from earth to sky. Afterward, outside the church, the mood would shift. The bells would ring again, this time with lightness. People talked, exchanged bread, shared news. Children ran among the gravestones, laughing, while elders watched with eyes that remembered those already resting beneath the soil. Faith was not separate from life, it was the center of it, shaping even their laughter and their grief. But life in the medieval countryside was not gentle. Taxes came with relentless regularity. The Lord demanded his share. The church took its tithes, a tenth of grain, a portion of every harvest, a coin when coins were rare. Still, the peasants paid, not always gladly, but dutifully, for defiance could cost them everything. And yet, even under the weight of these burdens, they found ways to be kind to one another and to themselves. When a neighbor's roof collapsed, others came with wood and straw to rebuild. When a cow fell ill, someone offered herbs or advice. When a child was born, gifts appeared at the door, a loaf of bread, a carved spoon, a small blanket. It was these small gestures, unrecorded, uncelebrated, that kept their world intact. In them lay the true strength of the peasant's life. They had no armies, no riches, no power, but they had each other. On market days, that spirit of community was most alive. The village square would fill with voices and movement. Traders from nearby hamlets, traveling peddlers with ribbons and trinkets, the smell of roasted meat mingling with the scent of hay and earth. It was not merely a time to buy or sell. It was a time to reconnect, to hear new songs, share gossip, and remember that even in hardship, the world was wide. A musician might play a simple tune on a fiddle. A storyteller would gather a circle of children and speak of knights, dragons, and saints. For a few precious hours, the weight of daily struggle lifted, replaced by something lighter, joy, imagination, the reminder that they were alive. When war came, as it often did, it came like a shadow over everything. The sound of marching feet on distant roads, the whisper of rumors passing from farm to farm. The peasants did not fight the wars, yet they always felt them. Crops were taken to feed soldiers. Sons were conscripted to dig trenches or carry supplies. Fields burned, fear lingered in the air like smoke, and still, somehow, life continued. The land could be ravaged, but it always healed. The people could be broken, but they always rebuilt. After war came silence, not peace exactly, but a stillness that was its own kind of mercy. They would gather what they could, mend what was left, and begin again. In these moments of rebuilding, hope grew strongest. It was not loud or triumphant. It was quiet and steady, like the flicker of a candle that refuses to go out. a mother singing to her child as she kneads dough, a young man repairing a plow, an old woman planting seeds she knows she will never see grow. They found meaning in small things, in shared meals, in laughter by the fire, in the beauty of the sunrise after rain. To them, even the simplest blessings, a healthy lamb, a warm loaf of bread, a kind word, carried the weight of grace. Their faith was not naive. It was born of endurance, of surviving what could not be changed. They believed that suffering was not a punishment, but a passage, that each hardship was a stone in the long road leading toward heaven. When plague returned, when famine struck, when storms destroyed their crops, they did not curse the heavens. They prayed, they lit candles, they carried on, and in doing so, they preserved something rare and profound, a quiet courage that has outlasted empires. In the stillness of night, you can almost imagine them, the faint glow of their fires across the hills, the low hum of a lullaby carried on the wind. Their voices are long gone, but their spirit lingers in the earth itself, in every field, every path, every echo of a church bell fading through mist. By the time the late Middle Ages began to unfold, something subtle had started to shift across the quiet landscape of medieval Europe. The air, once heavy with the sameness of generations, now carried faint new currents, whispers of change, of movement, of possibility. For centuries, life had followed a single rhythm: birth, labor, faith, and rest. But now, small cracks were forming in the ancient walls of that order, letting in thin beams of light. The villages were still humble, the fields still vast and unending, but trade routes began to pulse faintly like veins through the land. Merchants traveled between towns, their wagons filled with cloth, salt, spices, and stories from faraway places. To the peasants, these travelers seemed like people from another world, men and women who could move freely, whose lives were not bound to soil or lord. It was a small wonder, but it stirred something deep within, a dream that maybe, someday, life could be more than survival. Market days grew busier. Coins began to change hands more often. A few clever peasants found they could earn a little extra, selling wool, carved wood, honey, or cheese. These were small beginnings, yet in them was the seed of independence. For the first time, a peasant might look at what he had made and see it valued not just by his lord, but by others, by people who would trade a few precious coins for his work. That simple exchange held a quiet kind of power. In larger towns, guilds were forming, groups of craftsmen who shared their skills, taught apprentices, and protected their trades. Blacksmiths, weavers, masons, and bakers began to see themselves not just as servants of the manor, but as part of something greater. Knowledge, once locked in monasteries, was slowly making its way into the hands of common folk. Literacy crept like dawn through the edges of society, one candle, one prayer book at a time. And yet, even as change stirred, the old world still lingered. The church's bells still ruled the hours. Lords still claimed their due. The land still demanded its endless labor. But the heart of the peasant world had begun to hum a different note, quiet, uncertain, but persistent. The great cathedrals that rose during these centuries were built not only by noble hands, but by thousands of peasants and craftsmen, their sweat mixed with mortar, their hopes buried beneath each stone. They could never claim ownership of what they built, but they could look upon it with pride, a human monument that reached toward heaven, carved by those who spent their lives on the earth. The beauty of the world began to reveal itself in new ways. Music drifted through the air, not only hymns, but songs of love, of loss, of longing. Paintings grew more lifelike. The faces of ordinary people appeared in them for the first time. A mother, a farmer, a shepherd, captured in color and light. The divine was still everywhere, but so too was the human. In some towns, traveling fairs arrived with jugglers, musicians, and fortune-tellers. To a peasant who had never left his village, these moments were magic. The laughter, the noise, the smell of roasting meat and candles. It was a fleeting glimpse of a larger world. Children would tug at their parents' hands, eyes wide with wonder. For a few precious hours, they could forget the weight of their daily life and simply watch and dream. But the greatest change of all was not in the towns or the trade routes. It was in the human heart. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, peasants began to see themselves as individuals, as souls whose worth was not measured only by the land they worked or the tithes they paid. It was a quiet awakening, a thought so fragile it could barely be spoken aloud. A boy might look at the horizon and imagine walking beyond it, A girl might dream of learning to read, of seeing the words of scripture for herself. A craftsman might begin to sign his name on the corner of his work, a small mark, but a declaration that he, too, existed. The seasons still turned. Life was still hard. Hunger, war, and sickness still came without warning. Yet something was changing in how people faced it all. The soul of the Middle Ages, once bowed beneath the weight of obedience and faith, began to lift its head ever so slightly toward the light. The road ahead was still uncertain. Feudalism still held its grip, but beneath it, the quiet foundations of the modern world were taking shape, built not by kings or knights, but by the endurance, curiosity, and quiet courage of common people. As dusk fell over a medieval village, you might imagine the sound of a lute drifting through a window, the soft chatter of neighbors gathered after work, the laughter of children playing in the fading light. The world was still humble, but within its calm simplicity, something timeless was awakening, the human spirit, stretching gently toward freedom. By the time the late medieval world ripened toward its twilight, something gentle and luminous began to stir across Europe, not loud or revolutionary, but subtle, like a slow sunrise after a 1,000-year night. The hum of peasant life, once bound entirely to earth and ritual, began to mingle with whispers of beauty, learning, and imagination. The change did not arrive in grand halls or royal courts alone, but quietly, drifting like pollen through the fields and the towns, landing in the hands and hearts of ordinary people. In the soft candlelight of a cottage, a craftsman carved a pattern into wood that no one had asked for, a curve, a swirl, a flower. It served no purpose but to please the eye, and in that small act, art was reborn. Beauty for its own sake, form for feeling. It was the beginning of something deeper, the recognition that even the humblest life deserved grace. You might imagine a weaver at her loom, fingers dancing across threads dyed with plants she gathered herself. The rhythm of the loom, the whisper of fiber, the soft clack of wood, it was a music of patience. Patterns emerged, repeating, symmetrical, almost meditative. She did not think of herself as an artist, only as a worker. Yet in the glow of the firelight, her woven cloth shimmered with quiet perfection. Villages, too, became galleries of devotion and creativity. Wooden crosses carved by hand, painted altarpieces that blended divine imagery with the faces of local farmers. Even church frescoes began to show shepherds and townsfolk among the saints, a gentle merging of heaven and home. It was as if the divine and the human were no longer strangers, but companions. Bot's music carried this feeling too. Once, only monks had sung in stone chapels, their voices rising in slow, measured harmony. But now, song found its way to the tavern and the harvest field. Simple tunes, passed from mouth to mouth, carried stories of love and loss, of faith and folly. The melodies were soft and repeating, meant to soothe the long hours of work, and through them, people learned that beauty could belong to everyone. In some towns, new kinds of painters and thinkers emerged, people who looked at the world not only as something to survive, but as something to understand. They studied light, shadow, and the proportions of the human form. Their hands tried to capture the truth of what they saw, the curve of a cheek, the gleam in an eye, the way sunlight filtered through a church window. These small acts of observation were the first breaths of what would later be called humanism, the belief that the human experience, in all its fragile, fleeting beauty, was worthy of wonder, even among peasants who could not read or write. This awakening was felt in ways both subtle and profound. Storytelling, for instance, began to evolve. Around the hearth, families told tales not only of saints and miracles, but of clever farm boys, brave girls, and humble people who outwitted fate. Laughter returned to these stories, not mockery, but gentle humor, a reminder that life could be absurd and sweet all at once. The world itself was changing. Towns grew larger, roads busier. Pilgrims and traders carried with them not just goods, but ideas, sketches, books, songs, new ways of seeing. In the marketplace, a peasant might hear talk of distant lands where scholars debated the nature of the soul, or where artists painted the body not as shameful but as sacred. He might not understand it all, but something in those tales lingered, a sense that there was more to life than labor and obedience. In monasteries, quiet revolutions of thought unfolded. Monks began to copy not only religious texts, but also the old writings of Greece and Rome, philosophy, medicine, poetry. These manuscripts, saved by candlelight through centuries of silence, began to re-emerge into the world. Though most peasants would never see them, the ripples reached far. They shaped the art, the architecture, even the prayers of their time. If you listen carefully, you can almost hear the sound of brushes on plaster, chisels on marble, and the soft rustle of parchment turning. The world was still medieval, full of superstition and hardship, yet within it, a new sense of beauty was being born. A belief that life itself, fragile and fleeting, was a kind of art, and through it all, the peasants remained the quiet backbone of this awakening. Their hands built the cathedrals, their crops fed the cities, their songs inspired the poets who would later write of simple virtue and honest toil. Though history seldom remembers their names, the Renaissance, that bright flowering of art and thought, was planted in the soil they tended. At night, under the same stars their ancestors had prayed to, a peasant might look toward the horizon and feel something he could not name. A stirring, a question, a dream. The world was changing slowly, gently, beautifully. It was as if humanity itself was taking a deep, drowsy breath, the kind that comes before waking, though still half asleep, wrapped in the calm darkness of a long and quiet night. By the 15th century, the long night of the Middle Ages had begun to lift, not with fanfare or sudden brilliance, but in the slow, golden way a sunrise warms the mist above a field. For the peasants who had tilled that earth for generations, little seemed to change at first. Their hands still bore the same calluses, their fields still bent under the same winds, and yet something intangible began to shimmer between the furrows of their days. A quiet curiosity, a slow turning of thought, a soft collective breath that whispered, there might be more than survival. In small towns, new guilds were forming, not just of craftsmen, but of thinkers, painters, and builders. The cathedrals, once towering symbols of fear and devotion, began to glow with a different kind of purpose. Their stained glass no longer showed only judgment and divine wrath, but moments of tenderness, a mother's face, a worker's rest, a saint smiling faintly at a child. These subtle changes carried a new message, that divinity was not something far above, but something that lived quietly within the world itself. And still, the peasants worked. Their lives were the rhythm behind it all, steady, cyclical, and deeply tied to nature. Yet with every passing generation, a thread of imagination wove itself deeper into their fabric. Children grew up hearing stories not just of saints and kings, but of travelers, poets, and dreamers. They began to sense that one could live a life of thought as much as one of labor. Some of those children, through chance or patronage, would one day step into the cities Florence, Venice, Bruges, London, and find a world transformed. Streets filled with scholars discussing the stars, artists sketching human faces as tenderly as one might trace a memory, and printers pressing the first books that would carry ideas farther than any merchant ship. But for each great mind, there were countless others who remained in the countryside, yet who still felt, in their own quiet way, that they were part of something larger. A farmer might notice the beauty in the way light fell across his field at dawn. A mother might hum to her child a song she had heard from a traveling minstrel, a melody born in another land, carried by the wind of change. A young man, returning from a city market, might speak of strange machines, of drawings that captured motion, or of men who believed that the world itself could be measured and understood. It was not knowledge they sought, but a kind of belonging, a sense that life was expanding beyond their small circle of seasons and toil. The Renaissance, historians would later say, was a rebirth of reason and art, but to those who lived through it quietly, it was more like an exhale after centuries of holding one's breath. The colors of life deepened, the songs grew more layered, the human spirit, once bowed by the weight of feudal law and divine fear, began to stand gently upright again. Imagine walking through a small town during this time. The air smells faintly of whetstone and bread. Children chase one another past stalls, where books, real books, printed with ink and wonder, lie open for sale. A painter studies the curve of an apple, trying to capture light as if it were a living thing. A blacksmith pauses his work to watch, and for a moment, their worlds touch, the world of muscle and the world of thought. Even in the simplest cottages, echoes of change could be felt. Perhaps a prayer was whispered not from fear, but from gratitude. Perhaps a story told by firelight included, now and then, a question, why are things this way? Such questions, though fragile as a candle flame, had the power to reshape the world. And yet, life was still hard. Plague returned in waves. War never fully slept. Lords still demanded their dues, and hunger still lingered in the corners of winter. But through it all, there was a new balance between hardship and hope, between heaven and earth. The people were learning, slowly, that both could coexist in peace. You could say this was the first time humanity looked inward, not in fear of sin, but in curiosity about the soul. Painters explored it in faces, musicians in harmony, writers in words that touched the heart instead of the law. Even farmers, unknowingly, mirrored it in the care with which they tended the earth. It was all part of one quiet awakening, a recognition that beauty, compassion, and reason were not luxuries, but necessities of life. Dart in the hush of evening, when work was done and stars began to pierce the sky, people found themselves looking upward not just to pray, but to wonder. What lay beyond those lights? Was the world infinite? Could the heavens be mapped, not by faith alone, but by understanding? These were questions that stirred softly, like dreams before dawn. And though the peasants did not yet have telescopes or maps, they carried the same feeling that the world was vast, mysterious, and worth knowing. In this way, the end of the Middle Ages was not a fall into darkness or a leap into light, but a long, peaceful drift, the kind of transition one barely feels until one morning the light seems warmer, the air softer, and the silence full of promise. And when you listen closely, you can almost hear it, the sigh of an old world turning gently into a new one, the murmur of pens, brushes, footsteps, the quiet hum of 1,000 hearts realizing, all at once, that to be alive was its own kind of miracle. It is easy, from the quiet safety of our modern rooms, to look back upon the Middle Ages as a time far removed, a world of cold hearths and hard soil, where men and women bent under the weight of things we can hardly imagine. And yet, if you listen long enough, you can still feel them here, in the way we rise each morning, in the comfort we take in warmth, in the small rituals that make up our days. They are with us still. The peasants who worked the fields centuries ago are not just figures in forgotten manuscripts. They are the ancestors of every ordinary person who has ever struggled, hoped, or simply continued. Their rhythm became the heartbeat of our history, slow, steady, and enduring. When you boil water, when you break bread, when you sit in silence at the end of a long day, some small part of their spirit moves through you. Their world was one of repetition, sowing, reaping, mending, praying. But within that repetition was a profound wisdom. They learned, through hardship, that peace is not found in escape, but in acceptance. They knew that life was fragile, and that the earth asked for both labor and love. And so they gave both, again and again, until it became the story of humanity itself. When winter came, and snow lay heavy upon the fields, they waited, not with despair, but with patience. They understood that the frost would melt, the ground would soften, and that somewhere, beneath the silence, life was preparing to return. That same patience, that quiet, enduring trust in renewal, is something our fast world often forgets. Yet it's there, hidden under all the noise, the calm rhythm of things that grow slowly, that cannot be rushed, the soft persistence that builds everything that lasts. It is the echo of the peasant's life, carried through time in gardens, in the steady hands of builders, in every small kindness passed quietly between people. Even our stories, the ones we tell of courage, love, and faith, were shaped by their voices. Around their fires, tales were shared, not to dazzle, but to remind one another that endurance itself was a form of grace. That laughter, even when the belly was empty, was a kind of prayer. That the stars, even when unseen behind clouds, were still there. Think of a peasant woman standing in the doorway of her cottage at dusk, a lantern in her hand. She watches the last light fade over the fields where her family has worked all day. The air smells of hay and smoke. Her feet ache, her back is sore, but she smiles faintly, because she knows that tomorrow she will do it all again. There is a quiet dignity in that, one that time cannot erase, and though centuries have passed, we are still looking for that same dignity, that balance between effort and peace, between the world we build and the world that simply is. We decorate our homes with wood and linen. We seek simplicity. We crave stillness. We long for connection. All of these are echoes of a life once lived close to the soil, under open skies, where every sound, the wind, the church bell, the lowing of cattle was part of one vast, breathing harmony. In our cities, under electric light, that harmony can feel far away. But if you close your eyes, if you breathe slowly, you might hear it again, the faint hum of the earth beneath you, the rhythm of something ancient that never died. The peasants are there, in that rhythm. They are in the persistence of life itself. Their legacy is not carved in marble or written in gold, but in the endurance of ordinary things, the turning of the seasons, the trust that morning will come, the courage to begin again after loss. They taught, without words, that meaning is not found in greatness, but in the quiet doing of what must be done. Perhaps that is why their story feels so peaceful when told at night, because beneath all their struggles, the hunger, the taxes, the storms, there was always stillness, a deep, unshakable awareness of being part of something larger, of being one note in a long and endless song. And that song still plays, in every garden, every kitchen, every field that lies beneath the sky. It hums in the wind that brushes your window at night, in the rain that softens the earth, in the fire that flickers quietly in the hearth. The medieval world has not vanished, it has become the foundation of our own. When you next walk through a quiet morning, with mist clinging to the grass and the sound of birds just beginning to rise, remember, you are walking through their dream. The world they kept alive through their labor and their love is the one that holds us still. And maybe, as you drift towards sleep, you can take comfort in that thought, that long before you, countless souls lived and worked and hoped beneath the same stars. They laughed and wept and dreamed just as we do. They endured, and through their endurance, we were born into a world they helped to make gentle again. Theirs was not a life of grandeur, but of grace. And grace, once found, never truly disappears. It flows quietly from age to age through the soil, through the breath, through the stories we tell when the night grows still. So let the story rest, now. Let the fields fade into mist, the hearth fire dim, and the ancient bells toll faintly in the distance. The peasants have finished their day, the earth has gone still, and as the stars gather above, timeless and unbroken, you may close your eyes, knowing that you, too, are part of that same unending peace. Sleep well, for history, in its quietest moments, is always watching over you.